Again, Brian Ruiz, Community and Economic Development. This morning's workshop, we're going to be talking about the Economic Development Impact Fee Mitigation Program, we refer to as Edifm. You know, we love our acronyms. Back in 2010, the Commission first authorized the initial Edifm program and then reauthorized it in 2016. It is a waiver of non-utility impact fees, specifically transportation, police, and fire. Only residential pays parks, so these projects are not subject to the parks impact fees, so no need to waive them, to incentivize job growth and capital investment. The current program that was adopted or reauthorized in 2016 is due to expire on November the 1st. Hence the need for the workshop and to receive direction from the Commission about whether to create a successor program, and then if so, what that looks like. So we've got some slides relative to the current program. You saw right now there are three broad eligibility categories, one on the high wage side, which is to create 10 or more new jobs at 115% of Polk County average wage. Another is on a high number of jobs eligibility, regardless of wage. And there you see as create or retain 100+ jobs. And the third eligibility category is for inventory building or speculative construction. Specific to those eligibility categories, that mitigation amount you see in the far right-hand column of the table aligns with the number of high wage jobs or the number of jobs created or retained. And in the case of inventory buildings, I'm happy to forward the presentation to you if that would be helpful. Yes.
I was actually looking for it. I didn't realize we didn't have that. Sorry.
Well, I just get in a panic when you go to the next one because I won't be able to reference it unless I take a picture. So.
And I certainly can click back to. So those are our current eligibility rates, waiver of impact fee. So those percentages are a waiver of the transportation, police, and fire impact fee for an Edifm eligible project based on category of eligibility and the number of jobs created or retained. So looking back to 2010 through the present, there have been 31 Edifm projects, and there they are broken down by eligibility category. Inventory development or spec had the most with 18. High wage received, there were 10 projects that were approved, and then 3 for the high number of job creation retention eligibility. Same period of time, the fees waived by category of eligibility since 2010. And there you see it. For spec development, that was $2.2 million. For high wage, $2.3 million. And for job creation retention, $1.28 million. For a total, of $5.88 million in waived impact fees. So,
do you mind going back?
Yes, sir.
One more time. Let me just snap that one real quick.
Okay.
Thank you.
So moving to taxable value, I had to estimate the most recent projects that have not been reassessed by the property appraiser yet, but all the rest came straight from Marcia Fox's office on the valuation side. But that total, again, sliced by category of eligibility, in taxable value for 2022, it should say, is $617 million. So that is the taxable value of the projects that have been incentivized through the Edifm program. So taking that valuation and applying the FY22 millage rate that you passed last month, and again, this should say 2022, not 2021, that would net a property tax collection for those specific 31 projects of $3.28 million. So as we talk about wage and we get into options, considerations, and we'll go so far as to say recommendations, the Commission has on several occasions through the strategic planning process expressed a desire to increase the wage level for which we incentivize high-wage jobs, potentially from the current 115%. Here I've provided a table that shows the most recent wage data published by the Department of Economic Opportunity. It's from 2019, but was actually published earlier this year. For Polk County, you see that average annual wage is $43,365. The current 115% eligibility level, excuse me, of EDIFM is $49,870. And staff is recommending the commission consider increasing that in a successor program to 150% of the average annual wage, which is $65,048. Another couple of pretty big concerns are the impact of EDIFM eligible approved projects along failing corridors or those that are projected to fail. And so a recommendation from staff that you exclude those from EDIFM eligibility, with the reasoning being we need their participation to solve for that concurrency failure and don't need to exacerbate it by further waiving fees on failing corridors. The logistics and distribution use is another one that we have wrestled with, and as has the commission. So we are further recommending that the commission remove that use from EDIFM eligibility, or at least cap it at the first 400,000 square feet of project square footage that would be eligible for that incentive.
We just got that presentation emailed to us.
Can we do questions along the way, or do you want to wait to the end? Your choice.
Your choice.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it would be good to know where we have some examples of the concurrency failures on roads, for example.
I'm going to let Mr. Barmby speak to that issue.
So that can happen later, and then, or now if you want. And then how many of those 31 would have been beyond 400,000 square feet?
A good number. Our friends from the LEDC are here, and they have a presentation for you as well that actually includes the specific projects by square footage and by number of jobs created, so you'll be able to see that and how that 400,000 square foot cap would apply.
And will Mr. Barmby be part of the presentation, or should that
He can come now, or he can come at
let's
the
do
end
that.
of my presentation, since we're on concurrency. Are you going to go there? It doesn't matter to me.
Good morning, Chuck Barmby with Community and Economic Development. Really the current area where we've really tried to focus in on addressing concurrency deficiencies is the State Road 33 corridor from exit 38 up to the city limits at Polk City. And so because we don't have the ability to exempt projects from EDIFM because of concurrency failures today, we have worked with developers through memoranda of understanding that are executed by the city manager's office and the developer to charge a 100% rate based on a lower category. So for warehousing, what we have done is we have charged the high-tech distribution center rate, which is much lower than a standard warehouse rate, and charged that at 100%. So those numbers are probably slightly less than what we otherwise would have collected, but it allows us to go back to our comprehensive plan and to our level of service standards and say that we are doing our part to mitigate the traffic impacts of particular development or set of developments as best as we can in constrained corridors. So 33 is the current one where we are really coming up against capacity. Areas that are on the horizon are County Line Road as you get north of Pipkin, especially towards US 92 and I-4, and Airport Road. So I think those are the two corridors right now where we are very nervous about coming close to capacity in the very near future.
So when Commissioner Matt McCarley.
So for high-tech versus the standard warehouse rate, are you looking at the semis and like the impacts of those on the roads, and how do you measure that?
We don't have anything that looks at the type of vehicles, which gets into another concern about logistics type uses, is that once the building is up and operational, it may not be a capacity issue because of when their peak is typically off peak in terms of commuter traffic, but over time it has a significant impact on the maintenance of our roads, whether it's the state road or a county road or a city road. That truck traffic over time eats into our ability to maintain the road, and the only source of funding we have for that right now are gas tax dollars. And as we know, our purchasing power now is a little over 50% of what it was when those gas taxes were updated last 20, 25 years ago. So in terms of specific logistics, they typically have a lower amount of employees, higher amount of truck traffic, but that truck traffic is occurring at different hours of commuters. So it's not a concurrency issue as much in that instance as it is a maintenance issue.
So you don't really have a variance of
Right.
costs between the two?
Correct.
It's the difference of what you want to attract,
Right. I'm just thinking about the wear and tear on the road.
right? You're being functional, but that decision is made on the inside of the warehouse of what they're doing,
And those are corridors like the State Road 33 corridor. You've got a very high truck percentage, and it's not only because of what's being approved within the city, but Polk City has the Best Buy warehouse, and another warehouse site right next to it is going through the development review as well. County Line Road, the last time I looked, you were probably over 20% truck traffic as you got closer to the interstate, and then Airport's another one that's, you're probably in that 15% range in terms of truck traffic. So that is a very big issue for us.
Thank you.
So what is the trigger that trips it into failure? And so you talk about their near failures, so they would be eligible right now, and then all of a sudden something's going to happen. So what is that trip line?
In the State Road 33 corridor, it's a combination of the segment volume relative to capacity, and then frankly the area around exit 38. So it's the interchange itself that is really governing how we look at the entire corridor. And so the way we've structured those MOUs or those memorandum of understanding is that we would take the impact fees that are collected and commit them in the CIP for State Road 33 in the vicinity of exit 38. We can't charge impact fees for the interstate highway system, but what we say is that we're trying to at least maintain or manage the segment of State Road 33 within the interchange area. And so that's been something that we've worked out with several developers, and they've been amenable to it, because the other flip side is a lot longer. We would require a lot more detailed, longer term analyses to figure out exactly whether or not we should approve the development to begin with. We don't want to get in that position, and so we're just trying to use the system as best as we can to collect money and apply it to where we believe the capacity issues are the greatest.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
And another quick note on the logistics and distribution use. You may recall back in 2019 when the commission approved our most recent impact fee study, that use, logistics and distribution, was the only use that the city commission adopted at 100% of the consultant's recommendation. Okay, so in furtherance of that discussion about warehouse distribution uses, the commission has also been keenly focused on the innovation district. So in our internal discussions, we have explored and arrived at a recommendation where if you do not choose to exclude that use from EDIFM eligibility in whole, that you consider excluding it from the innovation district. The innovation district boundaries, or should I say the PUD, has land that has entitlements for warehouse uses at present. We're only recommending that you consider not incentivizing them beyond the entitlement that they already have. And then to take that a step further and really, I think, align with the commission's desire to see the innovation district turn into the R&D hub for our city, is to consider increasing the EDIFM incentive to which other eligible projects in the boundaries of the Innovation District qualify. So to give you an example, right now, 10-plus new high-wage jobs would entitle a project to 50% waiver of those impact fees. Within the boundaries of the Innovation District, perhaps that incentive for 10-plus new jobs is 70% or 75% to further incentivize that type of investment and development and employment growth in the Innovation District. And finally, this slide is our best attempt to show the impact of waived fees on the impact fee trust accounts themselves. And that at present, there's no policy or mechanism in place to fill that gap, meaning for the life of EDIFM to now, those waived impact fees are not recaptured or recovered in any way by those impact fee trusts. Even though, as I showed you in earlier slides, and you can see actually in the left pie chart there, that there are significant property tax collections that result from development of these projects, presumably as a result of, if not fully, at least partially, their eligibility and approval for the incentive. So staff is recommending that the City Commission consider filling that gap with a portion of those increased ad valorem collections, recognizing too that that is a one-time impact fee payment. The tax collections, of course, are year over year that would make those impact fee trusts accounts whole. And that is all I have. If you have questions, I'm happy to consider more now or answer them. But as I mentioned, Ashley Cheek from the LEDC has an additional presentation for you on EDIFM from the EDC's perspective. So I'm happy to turn it over to her if that's your desire, and then we can all answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
So go back one slide, please. And if we're looking at what happens today, where we have that gap, how is that getting funded today?
It's not. Correct.
Right. So it's just lost to.
Correct. Waived, impact fee dollars waived for EDIFM are just not collected. And they're not refilled. It's not replenished by any other source.
So any discussion about that, Commissioner Men?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brian. So I think, I mean, I don't know, I love the math formula here. I'm excited to think that we could, and I'd be interested to the how, on, you know, just like this past year, we had additional property taxes because of values increasing. And, you know, you're in the last budget hearing, and you're like, God, I wish I would have known I had an extra 700,000, you know, 6 months ago in the budget process. We could have really brainstormed on the best use of this, you know, additional money. So going into the next budget cycle, knowing that sometimes happens, and certainly does happen if you have value added by new build out, what's the downside of making sure that you're kind of thinking about, you know, as you're leveraging impact fee mitigation for new development, that then you come back and pay that out with the additional tax revenue in the future? It's not coming, it's not affecting the property owner, right? Because they're going to pay taxes, whatever they'd pay. It's just, we would make sure we make that allocation back into that impact fee fund.
Correct. And it really is a couple of different questions. One, of flexibility. The general fund, where those tax collections go, has the greatest flexibility for commissions to allocate funding annually as part of your budget process. Monies that go into these impact fee trust accounts are limited to capital capacity projects in the case of transportation, no maintenance. You cannot use those dollars for general government operations as you can from the general fund and do. So the thing to consider is just obligating the general fund in out years to expenses that may or may not be easily borne depending on what the circumstances are that year, where values are concerned, where other obligations of the general fund are concerned. Mr. Brosart and I talked yesterday extensively about this slide and about the philosophy, talking about gas tax collections, which go into the transportation fund and not an impact fee fund, but that are very nearly running short on keeping up with even our maintenance needs. So, that's the balance that the commission and our city manager and our finance director have to wrestle through, recognizing that even what we've recommended here, should you decide not to do that, has zero impact on the applicants, as you said, and it puts us in no worse a position than we are today, because for the 12 years that the EDIFM program has been in place, those impact fee dollars have not been replenished.
Yeah, so I think you get a better project or higher wage jobs because of the incentivizing. And then you have a mechanism to pay back the lost impact fees because of the quality of the project that was built. To me, I mean, I feel like this is like in a really exciting way to think that we're approaching growth in a fiscally responsible way, still incentivizing what we want to see in our growth.
And refunding that back so that we have a future pot to work from and not pull it from the general fund.
I like it.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you. And I definitely want to hear Ashley's presentation. This might answer, but I'm trying to, I guess it's hard to know if we were operating under the 150% threshold for these past 12 years, what this slide might look like. We don't know. I think it's been successful in the amount of the projects, the property tax collections, but we don't know if projects would have gone elsewhere or not come into the city of Lakeland. But I'm trying to get a sense of that, if it will push out other projects that would fall below that 150%. That might not be our ideal of those types of jobs, but would it have an impact on the success in the property tax collections?
Well, I don't think there's any denying that it would have some impact, and I don't want to steal Ashley's thunder, but she does have data relative to the wages that would have qualified. Okay. A lot of the jobs and wage levels that you will see qualified under the spec building category that doesn't rely on the wages. It happened to bring wages and jobs of a certain level, but that's not the criteria that it qualified under in the beginning. So we realized the benefit and actually provided potentially a lesser impact fee incentive to bring it about. But at the time, the developer nor the city knew what the end user would be or what those jobs that came in might look like.
And just one more comment on that, I mean, to bring in economic development numbers, which I know sounds amazing, when we think about the subsidy for RP funding center and you compare it with the economic development it brings in, to me it's a little nebulous, to kind of think about that. I mean, this is a fixed revenue and expense of your city formula. On your most basic, P&L, you get revenue and you have expenses. And if you're directing the revenue that's a direct result of those expenses and pouring it back into that pot so that you have more to expend for more of the revenue to then go back into the pot. I mean, it's to me, that's a great strategy that's directly related to growth, and it's one of the things we're trying to target effectively.
Agreed. I think Commissioner McLeod's questions are more about the wage recommendation that we've made, and what impact that may have on the future of the program, number of projects that qualify, amount that is incentivized or waived. So all good questions. Y'all ready to hear from Ashley?
Yeah.
She's got it teed up.
And thank you, Ashley.
If I may, as Ashley's coming up, I just want to touch on a couple of things. Staff has had conversations with the LEDC regarding where, staff is proposing to go with the renewal of the EDIFM. And I just want to call out to the Commission's attention that what you mostly see in these proposals are really tied to the conversations through strategic planning that we've had with the Commission, specifically related to infrastructure and higher wage jobs. However, the LEDC has some, compelling data and information and requests related to the program as well. So we've had good conversations, and the hope and the way we've kind of done this presentation today, really in partnership, is just because in the end, what we're looking for is, we've set up a proposed renewal of the program based on the comments and direction from the commission. But if the commission wants to amend that direction, that's what we're looking to try to find today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, commissioners. I'm glad to be with you all this morning. So I know Brian has kind of given you all an overview on the program, but I am also going to just recap again the 3 ways that you can qualify for EDIFM. So option 1 right now, job creation at 115%, and you can see the 3 different levels of the number of jobs. So if you create 10, you can get up to 50%. Obviously, the more jobs you create, the more you can have mitigated. These are all tied to wages. Right now, the 115% average wage is $49,850. And then option 2, that was for industrial job creation. So if a company was coming in and creating at least 100 new jobs and they were an industrial company, they could receive up to 50 to 90% depending on the number of jobs. And then lastly, again, inventory and spec development. So if a developer comes in and wants to build a minimum of 70,000 square feet, they would automatically get 50% discount on their impact fees. So just want to move into a quick overview of the industry and company expansions. So this list really encompasses option 1 and option 2 that we just talked about. So it's combined of companies that came in and created jobs at a certain wage, and also companies that came in and created a large number of industrial jobs. So we have 11 projects listed on this slide that you can look through, beginning in 2012 to 2018. It consists of 2.3 million square feet that was developed, 2,700 new jobs that have been created. The city mitigated about 3.6 million in these projects. And then we actually went back and looked at the city taxes that have been received. So from an annual basis, the city would receive almost $1 million in taxes from these projects. So again, impact fees was a one-time mitigation. The taxes are an annual payment. And just wanted to highlight the overall average wage of these 2,700 jobs that were created is right now about $57,000. You can see that I put the wage thresholds in here. So most of these companies, when they applied for this incentive, applied at the 115% because that's the minimum threshold. Several of them, you can see about 4 of them, their jobs that they have created really are in that 150% range right now. So I wanted to highlight the ones that are kind of in that 150%, but again, they did come in and apply at 115. Most of our incentives that we work on, the minimum threshold is 115%. And so I think that's why we created this program, because it's consistent with the other incentive programs that we have in place. And so that's why you'll see that a lot of companies only applied for 115, but they may have created jobs at a higher wage. Any questions on this slide?
Yes, ma'am. So in the average wage, you have 115 or 150, but in fact, you're saying their average wage probably is a percentage higher than that blend.
Potentially, yes.
But you don't have a column for actual for each of those, do you?
I do not. So you can see the average wage. Does this pointer work if I?
Yes.
Okay. So I highlighted the average wage that they all applied at 115%, but I highlighted those, I think it's 4 or 5 that I put at 150 to show that those industries really have jobs in that threshold. And now other companies, they could also have a number of jobs that are higher than 115%, but just wanted to highlight the ones that we knew of. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well then I will move into the next slide. Let's see. So just a quick overview on that last slide. So 11 projects, 2.3 million square feet, 2,700 new jobs. It was about 3.6 million that was mitigated in impact fees and close to $1 million that is gained in taxes annually. We also took the time to calculate, since each of those buildings have been on the tax roll, so the first one starting in 2012, about 7.3 million has been gained in taxes overall. So I have the annual number listed, but we went back and calculated based on when those buildings were built and how long they have been on the tax roll. So moving into inventory development, so the third option to qualify. So just want to highlight, what is inventory development? Any prime space that has not been leased to a tenant prior to commencing construction on a new building. And why is this important for our community? It provides move-in ready product for companies expanding or moving to Lakeland. It's the mantra, if you build it, they will come, and this really helps put Lakeland on the map. And it kicks off development of industrial parks, and it also helps build Lakeland's tax base like we've discussed. We also wanted to highlight the inventory developers that we have seen in our community building product. So locally, we have 4 developers that have been very active in building inventory and spec warehouses. So Aspire Properties, Blue Steel Development, Central Florida Development, and the Ruthvens. We've also seen an influx of out-of-town developers who have really shown an interest in our market and have seen a lot of success being in Lakeland. So anyone from Atlanta to Dallas has invested in our community. And then inventory development all time. So this really goes back the last 35 years. The first graph that you're looking at that says 1987 to 2004, you can see that over that span of time, we saw 3.6 million square feet of spec and inventory development built. And that's about a 20-year span. Moving into 2005 to 2021, we have seen that increase significantly to 11 million square feet. And you can see, the thresholds have gotten higher. But I also just want to point out, 2008 to 2011, we had no development. So those were recession years. And so I just want you all to be mindful of that as as we move forward. We don't want to take away something from our toolbox that would help development and help increase our tax base and help create jobs, just as we move forward. And then this is a graph that shows all of the developments that have taken place inside and outside of the city limits that were built on a speculative basis. So we have about 8.4 million square feet of development since 2012. And this graph shows all the development that has taken place since the EDIF program has been in place. So out of that time period, there was 3.3 million that was mitigated from the city at a 50% rate. And the city has gained 2.4 million in annual taxes. So again, a one-time fee, and then that's the annual payment to the city.
And can you go back just one
Yes.
second, please? The 2017 node EDIFM, what was that? On the Waring Road?
Oh yes, so that was a small developer that built, I think it was like a 30,000 square foot flex warehouse built on a speculative basis and did not apply at the time. So kind of an outlier.
Okay, just curious, okay.
Any other questions? And again, this is just another map similar to another graph similar to the ones that we saw earlier, but this just focuses on the time period that the EDIF program has been in place, so the last 10 years. About 9 million square feet developed. And then just a quick overview, that's about 19 projects inside the city limits, 8.4 million square feet, 3.3 million was mitigated, 2.4 million is gained in taxes annually, and then 6.8 million gained in taxes overall. So again, the amount of time that those buildings have been on the tax roll. Yes.
Do you have a number on their fees for service, what they're paying fees for service in addition to all that?
I do not have that number.
But,
Yeah.
but you've accumulated
You've shown
some
that
of it.
before, though, yeah.
Right, yes.
Okay, I'm sure we could get those numbers and
I just think it would round out the picture, because that's a great picture, but it might make it a little bit.
Enhances the picture.
yeah, sure.
Well, especially as we're talking about developers and how
Yeah.
the fees are gonna, for water and sewer, that would be a great addition.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then just quick overview of both new jobs at a higher wage, industrial job creation and inventory development, kind of how it's all come together. So it's about 30 projects inside the city limits, 2,700 new jobs like we've talked about, 10.7 million square feet total, 6.9 million mitigated, 3.4 million gain in taxes annually, and then 14.8 million gain in taxes overall. And then our recommendation, really this is our presentation to show that the EDIF program has proven to be successful for Lakeland and in our growth of new inventory and new jobs, new companies moving here. Inventory will always be a need for growing companies. So whether it's a company that wants to move to our community or a company that wants to expand in our community, having available inventory is so important. And we recommend leaving the program as is. Questions? Yes.
We don't have an exclusion on the expansion of distribution space for high-tech versus regular distribution, do we?
We do not.
Should we?
I don't believe that we should. I think that having, a lot of inventory developers that are coming into our community are building warehouses, and I think in our minds we think, okay, most of the time a logistics company will move in there, but that doesn't always mean that it won't be a higher tech company. And so I think from the inventory spec development side, I don't think that we should put limitations on that.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. You may not know, and maybe Jason does know, of the people that we issue these incentives to, how many of them don't meet their threshold of employment, stuff like that?
We have not had anybody fall out of the EDIFM program that I'm aware of. So if it's a company that applied for this program based on the jobs that they were creating and at the wages, I do not believe that we have had any companies fall out of the EDIFM program.
Good.
And is there a clawback?
I believe so, yes. I think it's tied to the state incentives as well. So I know if, I believe that there's a clawback for EDIFM.
Yes. Okay. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Ashley, on the idea of concurrency failures, corridors where there are transportation issues, exclusions for those areas, as Chuck mentioned earlier?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the idea that if we have projects coming onto one of those corridors where there are already or projected transportation concurrency failures,
Right.
if I understand it correctly, Chuck, that would be an exclusion, right? That they would not be eligible under this program. I'm just curious, do you have thoughts on that? I know those are smaller areas geographically when we look out across the
Sure.
city, but
Yeah, I would say, those areas are where the biggest industrial developments are taking place. And so we would not want to see exclusions in those areas. I know that, do you have something to say?
Yeah. Felt me looming over you. Steve Scruggs, Lakeland Economic Development Council. Good morning. It's wonderful to be with you. The 33, absolutely fine. I mean, it's already being done. They didn't come back and ask for permission to do that anyway. Chuck's been doing it, and we have no problem with that. When we say projected, that concerns me. We can say projected about anything. So until it meets whatever the threshold it is, we would be absolutely opposed to projected areas.
Well, that was really my earlier question.
I know it was.
What
yeah.
creates the failure?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And what I would say in terms of projected, we can certainly clarify that, for a large development, we require a large traffic, we require a traffic study anyway. And so based on that analysis, that's done by a professional engineer, reviewed by not only the developer, but by usually city staff and county staff, we'd be able to make the call whether or not it triggers a segment or an intersection failure. And so I think with that, we would have a professionally developed study that would be able to provide that data and that conclusion for us.
Meaning, in advance, we would have corridors that are yellow caution that say this is what the trip line will be.
Exactly. And in terms of what we already have now from a very global standpoint, we rely on the TPO's roadway network database, which shows us segment capacities, segment volumes as they exist. And so what we typically do is go and take a look at vested trips from other development that we have approved in that interim period before the traffic's actually on the road. And so we've got the ability to track that data, track those trips, and then add the development on top of it to see where we stand.
But when we're doing spec inventory development, what are you going to use as your base?
what we would use in that instance, or what we use today, are the trip rates that are developed by the Institute for Transportation Engineers, and they've got basic data for general warehouse categories or more like high-tech distribution types. So they've got categories with trip generation rates that are already built in that we would use, and so regardless of the actual end user, we're very comfortable in terms of a specific building, specific size, building type, that we would have a handle on what that trip generation would be regardless of the user.
But Chuck, I mean, what you're talking about is what you do all the time anyway, right? This is not anything new. Any big project coming in, we've been doing that for 40 years.
And that's where, with
Yeah.
that analysis, then we would be able to say that there's a projected failure on that
Yeah.
specific segment or intersection.
Yeah.
Then we could then trigger the exemption in the.
But this is what you do all the time. This isn't new.
No, this would be a formal process. This would be a formal change to make sure that we codify what we're generally doing right now on the Sabre 33 corridor. It would be something that we would apply to other areas like County Line, Airport
Well, let's
Road.
talk about County Line for a second. So how are you going to hold Plant City accountable to that? If we hold people accountable and say that County Line's failing, but Plant City decides they want to build a warehouse on their side, how are you going to stop that?
That is a huge issue that goes well beyond staff.
Oh, well, yeah,
it-
but I mean, it's
it
something
is-
we
it
all
is
ought
a
to talk
problem.
about here. It's not, let's not say this is a projected area and then let Plant City keep building millions of square feet that then affect us and we stop development. That doesn't make any sense to me.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't agree with projected. Just, we would not want the commission to go with projected at all. That's not a good deal for us. 33 we agree with. Let's not start saying these areas are an issue.
So to restate that, you wouldn't want to go with yellow, you'd want to go with only red. In other words, once it's failed.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Correct.
I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner McClellan.
Thank you. So Chuck, what you're doing today, would you say that that gives us more flexibility under this plan? So if we put an exclusion for concurrency failures, does that make it more rigid? Does that put us, that is a great point about the Hillsborough Plant City side. I understand where you're coming from, and I think that's it is something we have to keep an eye on, is the impact on those already failing roads. But I'm just wondering if what you're doing in practice, if it works, does that give us more flexibility in this program without codifying it into?
If we codify it in the program, then I think it makes it more rigid. And I do agree, in the County Line Road example, we have to get a handle on what's going on across the road in Plant City and Hillsborough County. Because clearly at this point, I think based on all the development that's occurred over there, we've collected $60,000 that have been applied to the County Line US 92 intersection. So to me, they're hooking up to the county's infrastructure. And County Line Road is operated by Polk County. They're hooking up to Polk County's infrastructure, which affects our network as well. And I don't see where they're paying their fair share. We have other corridors where, like Airport Road, 33, where that is certainly beyond County Line Road. And most of that traffic is either being approved by the county, probably a small percentage, and mostly by the city. And so we've got more control over how that works out. But I think if we codify it, what it does is it provides us a stronger legal justification for doing what we're doing today. And it gives us the backing of the city commission to continue doing that going forward.
Commissioner Reed.
Chuck, does a road level server for F, does that apply to the same thing in Hillsborough County as Polk County?
It should.
I would think so as well.
It
I'm
should.
just wondering, if it's a failing road, they can't do anything in Hillsborough, we can't do anything in Polk County.
And I would say in that instance, and this is where County Line Road is a very tricky issue, and I know we've talked about this in the past, is that a project that's going through the development review in Hillsborough is really applying for a permit, a driveway connection permit in Polk County. So Polk County is reviewing the traffic study, but I'm not sure how Polk County is using its permit to make a concurrency determination that then goes back and commits or encumbers a development in Hillsborough County to actually mitigate the project impacts. What happened, the example where we collected the $60,000 was a development. We had two developers on each side of Rice Road, which is what Drainfield turns into in Hillsborough County, and they were showing a failure at Old Tampa Highway and County Line Road. Well, because of the ongoing work that's going on related to the US 92 project, we're closing off that median opening. So we actually went to the county and said, if you're collecting money or thinking about collecting money from Hillsborough County, let's apply it to the 92 intersection. And the county, both developers were willing to do that. We entered into an agreement, collected those dollars, and those are being applied today. But I don't know if that's standard practice in terms of the Polk County review of a driveway permit for a development review going in Hillsborough County.
Can I ask a question, Chuck? I really don't understand. Based off the failure, why are we creating a new rule for EDIFM? Why don't we just keep whatever the rule is that we have for the city? If a road's failing and we don't let somebody develop on it, then that's the answer to the question. I think it feels like we're trying to create another level for the impact fee that we don't have for everything else. Is that true?
I mean, I think to boil it down, the answer is that if we run into a concurrency failure, the answer is no.
Yeah, so why would we change anything? Of course it's no.
Then we don't get the development.
Right. I mean, that's the rule we have all the time now.
And I think to your point, what you're saying is that forces it to go, and I'm talking to Steve, that forces it to go to the other side of the street because they.
Well, maybe, but they're going to have the same issue on the next eventually too. My point is, let's not create another rule for EDIFM that's different than whatever our city rule is for failing roads anyway. Why aren't we just sticking with failing roads? If it's a failing road, we're not going to approve it anyway.
And what I would say too is that we've got, a lot of times impact fees get confused with concurrency, and they're really two different issues. And so what we're trying to do is through the EDIFM and really the procedures we've been applying in State Road 33 corridor is, okay, saying we've got a level of service standard we have to meet in the comprehensive plan. I mean, that's the law of the land.
Right.
So we're trying to do that and not tell development no, but take their impact fees that they're collecting and applying them to address that concurrency failure. So it's a way of providing some flexibility to say, okay, we're going to use impact fees in this instance to help directly affect the concurrency failure that would otherwise be created by that development or a series of development within a corridor. So that's where things get a little complicated is that if we were to look strictly at our concurrency ordinance, we would have the right to say no, and that would be the end of the story. But we want to continue to try to encourage this development to occur, and so by using basically our professional judgment and what we're able to collect in impact fees to help mitigate that concurrency failure, I think we're able to address both sides of the street, allow the development to occur, but still meet the commission's comprehensive plan.
And all we're saying, Mayor, is that we're agreeing with everything that Chuck is saying. We're just saying let's not have proposed in the EDIFM ordinance.
So that when the exclusion would occur, or when the absence of concurrency occurs, that we could then say, in this case, on this project, we're going to have to make a smaller amount of mitigation. We could make that decision later, as we get to the project.
And there may be something that what we can do as part of, and I think we still need to have it in writing and adopted some way, somehow, but say that if a concurrency failure is determined through the normal site plan approval process or the site development process, then we would have the ability to exclude or somehow address on a case-by-case basis, address that failure through the collection of full impact fees to address that failure.
To me, that would make sense.
And I think that's...
Well, while Chuck's up here, I do have one question. When you talked about local roads and concurrency and impact fees, I just, from an impact fee perspective, if you're looking at 33 or looking at County Line Road, there is an inference that there's a lot of local traffic that creates. Most of the warehouses and manufacturers are locating very close to I-4 because they don't want to drive on local roads. So I just make it clear that most of those trucks that you say are wearing out the roads, the local roads, the only thing they're wearing out is from that warehouse to the I-4. There might be people that are driving back and forth to work there. I don't think that's really tearing up the roads, but I'm not sure I agree with that assessment. Most of all these warehouses that are being built are either on County Line Road or at 33 and I-4, and they're not driving on and tearing up local roads.
Well, I would say in the instance of State Road 33, if you look at Center State East, they're almost 3 miles from exit 38. And that's the only way to get back to the interstate is to come back either down 33 or go up through Mount Olive Road, circulate around and go to 559. So they are hitting the local road. It may not be 10 miles, but it could certainly be 3 or 5 miles.
Right.
On Airport Road, there's no way to get to the interstate.
They're not driving downtown, or they're not in our neighborhood. It's like a 1 or 2 or 3 mile, it's not local like major truck traffic it's bringing into the city.
Commissioner Music.
So do we not have, to Steve's point, do we not have something already set up in place where if we see that we're gonna have these failures, a red flag comes up anyway, right?
It does.
Right, so I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand why we are talking about making a change if we're already having an issue, a flag comes up and we say, hold on, let's push pause. So I like the idea of having the flexibility, to be able to say, let's make this decision, let's talk about it, where if it's rigid, then again, maybe the developer says, I'm out of here, I'm going to the other side. So maybe I just need an education, I'm not understanding.
Pretty much what we've been doing at this point is taking the comprehensive plan and using that as a basis for professional judgment for individual traffic studies that have been coming in. We get a request for Edifm, we're making the call to say that we could either say no or collect impact fees at a lower rate for that development. I think what we'd be looking for and what we were just talking about was maybe a scenario where we formalize language through the Edifm ordinance that says that if a concurrency failure would otherwise be triggered by development, that we would collect impact fees, the full 100% impact fees for that use, and that at that point in time, that specific development would not be eligible for the Edifm program. And we're not saying that blanket that any development in that area would not be eligible. We would just say that for that specific development that's being evaluated at that specific time, that one would not be eligible. So we're not making a blanket statement. We're basically doing what we're already doing, but trying to get that codified so that it's more of a city commission decision and not something that is seen as more as a staff decision.
So do we have an example of where that's kind of bit us in the butt and we would have rather it been a commission decision? I mean, have we seen something come down that kind of created this need to codify it?
Not at this point.
Okay.
I mean, I think what we want to do is, as much as possible, get ahead of it.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think
it's. Are we being concerned about something that we have had experience for that we want to correct in the future, or are we just trying to hedge something that may or may not be, something that comes down, so.
Commissioner McCarley.
No.
No? I really thought you had one.
I mean, the only thing I would say is I understand Steve's choice of saying projected because I think that's semantics. But I think too that if we were looking at this 10 or 15 years ago and we look at Drainfield Road and we look at Waring and way back then, we may not have projected the traffic impacts that we have there right now, right? Like we may have said this will be more North Lakeland, this will be more South 37, somewhere down there. So I think that's where the sticky grayness of projected wording comes in. And I do think too, and I've said this before, that when we are doing any kind of concurrency issues, we're looking everything in one dimension on a piece of paper. Like when you start driving around, we had a TPO meeting yesterday, and I think it was a well-taken point that no one really cares whether you're in Plant City or Hillsborough County or Polk County or Lakeland. Like if you're sitting in traffic, it just ticks you off, right? So I think that's one of the things that we need to think about is we don't want to lose development, which is what I'm hearing you say, and I know that's what LEDC wants. But we also don't want to make it so arduous that we're guessing at something that's a moving target.
By the time the traffic's already on the road, it's too late. So what we try to do is at least make sure that we preserve that capacity as much as we can, and frankly protect the Lakeland product. I mean, people are locating here because of our transportation system, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose that the value in that investment long term.
Commissioner McLeod.
Chuck, just thinking about along corridors where there's concurrency failure, if we collect 100% of those impact fees, you talk about mitigation, so is that enough? At 100% of collecting those fees, are we really able to turn it around? Not just mitigation, but does it really make a difference? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Exactly. Is what are we buying for that impact fee collection? That's a good question, and that's one that we've struggled with for years here, and part of it is because of what's gone on in Tallahassee. Tallahassee has kind of taken a lot of concurrency determinations out of local government's hands and turn it into fair share calculations. So, we've had several developments lately where we've actually entered into specific fair share agreements that are really the same thing as collecting impact fees. I mean, you can't charge more for a development than its impacts on the infrastructure. So impact fees really equates to that. Fair share is another way of saying that we're collecting funds to offset what a development is contributing to in terms of traffic, but we've got to give impact fee credits for a fair share agreement. So we spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of your time negotiating something that we're just kind of moving money from one hand to another. So I would say that impact fees are in this instance would be treated the same as a fair share agreement. And what we hope to do is accumulate enough funding through various, this impact fee payment plus this one, and we get enough to provide a match for either an intersection project like at County Line 92. We've got 2 Economic Development Fund grants for that intersection, plus a $60,000, plus an advanced impact fee payment from Lakeland Central Park for $650,000 for that intersection. So we've got 4 different funding sources that are being used to get that intersection done. And so that's the same philosophy here. It's not all, impact fees aren't going to build us a huge 4-lane road or even a major intersection. But accumulating those dollars over time gives us enough to be able to do a project in a key area.
Can I ask one other question? Would the language change? We said exception for existing or projected concurrency failures. Would the language exception for existing concurrency failures or a project that would create failure give you the codification you'd want?
I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay. Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just am curious, Chuck, in a lot of projects you talk about with the concurrency situation that then the developer has to buy a bus or, put in signalization. Are you saying you'd like this codified? In my opinion, you have flexibility now to be dynamic and kind of negotiate with the developer when there are traffic concerns and you have a certain amount of tools in your tool chest to do that, like build a transit shelter or buy a bus. Sounds like that's kind of what we hear that you do to kind of take care of some of these situations. Yes. So is this, in your mind, a tool in your tool chest? Or is it because in these projects where they receive this, you don't have that opportunity to negotiate things like that when necessary about a signalization or, like doing the roundabout, things like that? Because to me, I understand for you to want to have some predictability and to be able to have this codified, although what I appreciate most about our staff is when you are able to be dynamic and work with developers on independent projects on particular roads with specific tools, and each one can kind of come up with creative ideas that mitigate instead of having hard, fast regulatory rules. To me, I guess that's the business owner in me that likes to each project take it where it is, what the traffic count says, what are the tools in our tool chest, how can we get to a win-win with the developer versus trying to do that by regulation and red tape.
And I think in terms of the kind of the compromise language we've been talking about gives us just that, because really what happens is once we get a study back that shows that there's a failure, then we do get into say, okay, what can we do to kind of get us out of the gray area into something that says, okay, it meets our level of service standards. So like with Center State East, they paid full impact fees for the calculation. They also provided, as part of their driveway connection to DOT, we asked them to put in a transit stop. So they've got a bench pad, they got a deployment pad. So there was some additional costs there that the developer incurred. And then we've also got other things that are already in our land development code that backed us up in terms of pedestrian circulation and all that, so that long term, and some of this we're talking maybe even 15 or 20 years from now, you got folks that are going to be riding a bike to a major employment center. That infrastructure is already in place, and so we were able to kind of take that menu of options that we use already anyway, and say, okay, we're taking care of the concurrency failures, and we've got impact fees that we're applying to an interchange that frankly has been the top priority of the commission for a long time. So I think the revised language we're talking about gives us and codifies us, gives staff the authority to go ahead and exercise that flexibility that if we have a developer that's not familiar with us may come in and say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to want to have my impact fee, exposure reduced by 50%, and I'm done. So that, I think that's where having this in some ordinance form gives us, I think, comfort level to negotiate with an outside developer and say, this is what we do here, this is what the commission's expectations are. We will be flexible, but within these boundaries.
But it sounds like it's the program is the hook to get the developer that opens the door for negotiations. If you remove the hook, will you get the developer?
And I would say, in terms of logistics, because of our location in the interstate and the Polk Parkway, I mean, we're locationally well positioned for those types of uses anyway. I think the question is in that instance, in that question, it would be, do we want to encourage that type of use in an area that's already a problem? And so, I mean, ultimately, it's going to be their business call. What we would say is that, we've got to move the motoring public through this corridor one way or another. Here's what it would cost to do that, and you can do that by just paying your impact fees, and we'll make some other site development requirements of you anyway that are required in the land development code. But you basically pay your impact fees, and you can go ahead and continue to develop. And hopefully that's enough for them to want to locate at that spot, but to encourage more of those types of uses in an area that's already failing and not recoup some of that money, I think is what is concerning.
Well, and I'd be curious just to hear the other side of the coin with regard to LEDC, because, there's something about, showing that chart is powerful. There's no growth, and then there's explosive growth. Mm-hmm. And when do you get to the point where you feel like, oh, we've incented, and now we've received, the fruit of our labor of having that incentive, we've hooked enough. And then now maybe we should look at those incentives and focus. I mean, for me particularly, I don't know why, I'd love to see development out at Florida Poly. And, is it that these warehouses and distribution parks will come with or without incentive? Or do you feel like this is still a hook we need to get the continuance of this kind of development?
Yeah, I would say when you are looking at the other communities that we could essentially compete with, one of them being Plant City just across the street, I do think that we still need this hook because their transportation, fire, and law impact fees are almost 50% less than ours. They're actually less than 50%. Mm-hmm. So even when we're providing that 50% rate, developers are still paying a little bit more than they would pay in Plant City. And so I do think that it would be an important incentive tool to have in our pocket to get those developers to our community.
Commissioner Music.
Just another flip to that. So the Plant City Hillsborough side there has less, their impact fees and fees are less. Mm-hmm. Have we done an analysis of the land? Is the land less expensive, more expensive? Is there an offset there one way or the other on that? I'm just curious because you drive down I-4 or County Line Road and forever it was all on Hillsborough side, right? I mean, forever, and then we had the Amazon and some other things come up. So, I'm looking at it trying to balance how do we let somebody who knows every road around and the best way to move things with the economic development. And I believe that this hook is necessary. It's been working. We've shown it work. In fact, the one graph where if you take out all of those years we had that nothing happened, and then you take out the ones where almost nothing happened. I mean, we've had 4 or 5 years of just phenomenal growth, which can exacerbate obviously the issue here, right? You go from having no trucks to 600 trucks all at the same time. So so that's one part. The second part is can you go to I just need an education here on some of this. Can you go to the very first slide you had?
Sure.
So when someone is looking, this is when you were talking about the the qualification, I believe it is. So yeah, so when we're talking about this, so when there's obviously a difference between somebody coming and saying, hey, I'm going to open a particular plant or warehouse and I'm going to hire X number of people, right? And if they say on January 1, how long do we give them to hire those 50 jobs, 150 jobs? How does that work practically?
Sure, that's a great question. So whenever someone applies for this incentive, they're usually also applying for other state or local incentives. And those programs really are based on like a 3 to 4 year hiring period. So when the state had their qualified targeted industries job creation program, when a company applies for that program, they have to create those jobs within a 3 to 4 year period. And so most of the time when they're applying for that, they're also applying for this. And so that's kind of how we see that those jobs phased in. I don't think that this program particularly has a time period when they have to be hired. But like I said, most of those jobs were tied to other incentive programs that had to be within 3 to 4 years.
And then when you look at the other slide that talks about how many people, 2,500 jobs or whatever that number was, is that concurrent with what, if we rewind the clock and we look and say, okay, you guys said you were going to hire this many people, does the math equal up at the end that yes, they did indeed hire that many or more?
Yes, yeah, there's an audit process that these companies have to go through in order to ensure that they hire these jobs at those specific wages.
Okay. And then the third part of my question is when I look at the innovative district that we have, and I've been out there and I've seen a lot of other types of warehouses. Obviously, we've got Polytech, we've got the Mobility Innovation Center there. When we're looking at the advanced manufacturing, can you kind of describe or define what, if you guys are out and somebody comes to you and says, hey, you know, I manufacture this, how do you know that they'd be a good fit for that particular quadrant?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of manufacturing that is, and then the types of wages that it provides.
So it's a two-part. What are you doing, and then how much are you paying for what you're doing?
Because manufacturing is a large spectrum. You can have someone from a food manufacturer to someone who's manufacturing cars, and so a Tesla manufacturer would be obviously high tech, high wage, versus another type of manufacturer. So it really just depends on wages and the type of product.
Okay.
And the majority of that land is Auburndale's
Yes.
in that district.
Thank you.
Maybe on the transportation side, honestly, there's much more important things about this than that piece. That's about 5%, what Chuck and I were talking about. I'm really not that worried about it. And if you guys decided that County Line Road and Airport Road were off limits today, it wouldn't be that big a deal to me. There's other things that are being proposed in here that are much more significant that we ought to talk about. The 150% average wage that staff recommended versus what it is at 115%, there would probably be 4 or 5 of these 30 projects that would qualify moving into the future. If you change it to 150%, you will have 4 or 5 projects out of the 30 moving forward that will be able to qualify. So I just want to talk about that a little bit and see how the commission feels. The commission has said things like people on the commission over the last 10 years have said, we don't need any more warehouses. They don't pay enough. They're using up our transportation system. They don't pay a lot of taxes. Whatever all those comments are, I think that's a much more important conversation than a couple of corridors, and I'd love to have that conversation with the commission.
Commissioner Reed, you go first and then I'll get second.
Thank you. And again, Mike, to answer some questions for you too. Again, we're not only competing with Hillsborough County, we have Enterprise, Florida. We're competing with other states a lot of times. Again, one question I had, how do we match up with Hillsborough County? Do they incentivize more? They incentivize less? I know their medium income is higher than ours.
They're paying, Commissioner Reed, they're paying a lot more in incentive dollars, but the reason that they're paying a lot more in incentive dollars than the city of Lakeland does, Hillsborough pays a lot more, is because they're getting a lot more projects and a lot more projects that qualify than we do. We don't even get to see those kind of projects because they're not interested in moving here. And I don't mean that to be ugly, it's just the truth. We're not getting to see Citigroup or Solomon Brothers or,
Right.
Yeah, Pfizer headquarters, but they're not looking at Lakeland. So we only have certain kinds of.
The cultural aspects that they want and stuff like that.
There's a lot of reasons, housing, cultural, places for spouses to have a job at. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Education, public education, there's a lot of reasons.
Invariably, the reason we talked about the innovation zone is we want to kind of step up our income base versus have warehouse jobs. And I know the 115% is almost a necessity, but, and of course I empathize with you a lot, but I think we've been talking in the past, how can we get higher paying jobs?
To fix those 4 or 5 things we were just talking about.
And they're getting, with 150%, we get higher paying jobs. There may be less of them coming. And so it's a balancing act, in my opinion. And I'm not quite sure what we're really, I like the process the way it is now. It's just a matter of what number we pick. I've always thought we could incentivize it a little bit more for doing different things. And Jason and I talked about this frequently. He's here, I get a chance to walk by and I step in his office and we babble a little bit, but and of course I don't have the answer right now, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like we have an answer, a mass consensus right now on what we want to do. Maybe we need to push this back a little bit so we can talk about it some more. I think there's a lot of issues that we're going to be here all day.
Well, the purpose of this is a workshop for exposure, so that we're not trying to get to the conclusion today. It's just for us to get there. I will at least speak from my vantage point. At the time we're really talking about raising it from 115 to 150. My thought process was, erroneously as it may be, that we were trying to gradient up the kinds of jobs that we would attract, and that would, by numerical selection, push away some of the things we didn't. It would seem, based on what Ashley showed us, that the 115 works very, very well, and we don't create a trip corridor in addition, when in fact, if what happens is we get an average on 2,700 jobs, we average 57,000, we've attained what we were trying to accomplish. And so it's a little bit like the yellow on concurrency versus the red. As long as we can address the thing that creates us into failure, as long as we don't over-trip ourselves, it would seem like our existing program isn't off much. And I'd also like to hear from Jason how many of these incentive projects we've had failed. And I can only think of one where they didn't meet their hiring criterion and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason Willey, City Manager's Office. No, from the EDIFM, from the impact fee, we really have not seen failures. These are different from a lot of the other financial incentives, Commissioner Music, we talked about, the states, the QTI, the PCBI, some of the ones that are more job-based, where we get into an auditing process and we give a payback, a dividend for jobs created over a certain period of time. This is an upfront fee, so in the city of Lakeland, when we come in with a new project and somebody comes to town, they're paying permit fees to the building department going through this process. Our impact fees are paid up front, so they're right there on the front end. So often when a project is first coming to us, that's an impactful dollar amount from them. So from the failure standpoint, we haven't seen projects that we've had an agreed upon relationship for them to come into town and build a project and then it not work out the right way.
So that's important. And on the other comment I'd make, then when I think of the Innovation District, it's probably less that we don't, it's the kinds of businesses we want to attract and put in there that matter. Because if we really want it to be a research and innovation corridor that creates some unique capability for us here locally, that piece of land becomes very, very special in terms of trying to protect what we're doing there that would attract that kind of an environment.
From an EDC perspective on the Innovation District, we totally accept that we don't want warehouse out there, and we totally support not giving an incentive in that area. So that's not an issue. One thing I would say is maybe in the Innovation District, you take this to another level. Instead of going backwards, go forward and say, guess what? If you're going to create jobs at 150%, no matter what the size of the building is, like the new Flavors and Essence building, IFF is going to build on that campus, and just waive the impact fees. Just waive them totally. I mean, if that's what if that's what you want to do, just you can increase the incentive, not make everybody else have to, fall into a different category or
Commissioner
something.
Music.
No, I was gonna kind of ask that question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to go that
Yeah.
direction? Because that seems intelligent.
Just
yeah.
totally mitigate it, and
Right.
and if it's the innovation district and it pays a high enough wage, why pay it? You know, and you know what? Most of those companies aren't going to be 1 million square feet. It's going to be a 40,000 square foot, facility that's not going to put a lot of traffic on the local roads or tear them up. It's not going to be a trucking facility, so it totally makes sense to just waive it, because it's not going to be some huge. You wouldn't have gotten a big fee from them anyway. It's not going to be that big of a project, square footage wise. Yeah.
Any other comments? Commissioner Mann?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. It's just great to hear from all sides and get all the perspective. So I feel like just, contextually speaking in town is kind of how I always like to think about it, what's appropriate in different areas. And so obviously this is a great representation of where the market is driving growth, and excited to know that the hook has worked and that you still feel like it's necessary. Because there is kind of that, if people are coming here anyway, then make them pay the impact fees if they're coming. But if we still need that to hook them, or they're going to go across the road, to Plant City, then I think that's powerful to hear from your perspective. And we couldn't, maybe staff wouldn't have that same perspective, not looking at the market, as much. To me, of course, my main goal, here is trying to hook someone in the innovation district, and we haven't had a very powerful hook yet because obviously nothing's happening. So except for to try to preclude warehouse, because we know we have lots of other areas. Contextually, I love that we're doing that out on those two areas that you just said, 33 and County Line Road. But I just want to preserve as much as possible and to hook and incentivize as much as possible, to get the Tesla manufacturer out there. And so I think that is probably, for me as a commissioner, what I'm getting from this workshop is we still need the hook, and it sounds like that hook is working. Doesn't seem like there needs to be a lot of adjustment. Sounds like from Chuck's perspective, we still need to have tools and be dynamic and work flexibly with every project to make sure that we're mitigating traffic concerns as much as possible and that we support that, but not necessarily codify it with language in our impact fee. What is this, the EDI, what?
FM. EDIFM.
Yes, but I would like to move in some sort of fashion that we do have an exception for logistics and distribution eligibility inside the innovation district, and have an increased incentive for high wage jobs, even the possible removal of impact fees for that innovation district.
Yeah, I would support. Sorry, I didn't. I would support that, Commissioner Madden. I think that's that piece of it. If we're able to provide more incentives in the innovation district, and as Steve was describing, I think that makes sense. I do think we're a bit limited in our ability to influence what goes there. We can have all the tools at our disposal, and I've heard you talk about the vision we set from this commission and persuasion, but there's the market that we can't control, and so who knows what will happen out there eventually. But there is.
He heard that it was all of a sudden we had a big appetite for a larger hook. Then that plays into their math when they're considering what they can develop out there.
Other comments, Commissioner Music?
I'm just curious from your position in your seat, as I'm kind of hearing this, because again, I'm trying to catch up on so many of these acronyms and things that we've gotten, because I'm hearing part of it where it's like, man, everybody wants to come here because of where we are, right? We're the good-looking girl or the top quarterback, right? I mean, everybody wants us, right? A lot of opportunity when it comes time for prom. So what I'm wondering is, A, if that's the case, well, let's not give away the farm, right? Because we're positioned geographically and economically to be able to do that. But what are you seeing, and what is your team seeing as a resistance to Commissioner Madden's point of what do we need to do or give to be able to get that momentum going in that area for high wage things? I mean, is there something we need to be looking at, Steve, that we're not to be able to help?
For the innovation district?
Correct. Yeah, just specifically for that right now. Is there? I mean, you guys that's your job, that you're going out and you're trying to get this. How can we help?
Yeah, wow. Woo, wasn't ready for that. Yeah, I think on the innovation district, just specifically, it's about owning the land. And that's the biggest issue. And so because we don't control the land, we can't really control what goes on it, and we can't control what gets incented. So that's kind of outside of your control and our control. And so we really are trying to get creative to make things happen. And so when the Sun Tracks came along, I mean, that was literally a breakfast meeting with Randy Avent and myself and Wesley Beck, and he said, we got a chance to get this, but we don't have a piece of property to put it on. And I knew Ralph Allen had some land over there, and I knew the city of Auburndale had a spray field, and literally we went to Bobby Green and Ralph, and they made it happen. You have to get creative like that. It's the same thing with the IFF project, which is a Flavors and Essence high-tech. It would qualify exactly for what you're looking for, to pay no impact fees. It's a 30 or 40,000 square foot building, but we had to put it on the campus because there was no land out there that we were able to control or own, and that's not really what the campus is for. The buildings are supposed to go adjacent to the campus. So to this point, Commissioner Music, we've had to get creative to make it happen. I don't think there's anything you can do right now. It's more of a who owns the land.
But I think if we're going down, let's say, the incentive road, if we have the incentives and an individual owns the land and he knows that there are incentives, he can get some more value for the land, and that's where that could be a good triangle partnership there. Absolutely,
and if you want to give more incentives in the innovation district, it makes sense. It will help the developer. It will help us attract. One of the small ways you can do that is waiving impact fees, if you choose to do that. We'd have to do more than that. There'll be bigger asks than that, but that's one way you can do it.
And I think that I think that obviously early on, getting the first couple, you do maybe give away more than you typically would to get the farm going.
Sure. And I would say even on these, I'll probably shock some people by saying this, we could take a chance and get rid of this program. I don't think we'd get 30 more buildings built, and I don't think the city would get another 15 million in taxes a year. Cumulative, sorry. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot, and we're not opposed, obviously, to the $500,000. I mean, I don't know how Mike Brossart feels about that, but I would say, we're not opposed to that. That's an internal thing. I agree with Commissioner Madden's kind of thought process is, we give them the impact fee. We're getting this tax. We know what it is. We're fine with that too. But one thing that I would say that was on there that I would like to address that didn't get addressed, that will get addressed when you vote on it, was the staff wanted to cap it at 400,000 square feet. I'm not necessarily against that. It gets kind of complicated when somebody comes in and they're building a 500,000 square foot building. Well, you get 400 and then you got to pay on the 100. And I mean, it just gets to be a little bit much. The other thing that I would say is if you look at this list, we really are starting to see more and more projects that are coming that are bigger than 400,000 square feet. But let me give you an example that might be helpful. Amazon built 1 million square feet on County Line Road in 2013. They've now taken 3 or 4 or 5 other buildings in the market. If they had not come to Lakeland and we had not incented that in a number of ways, the county helped a lot with tax abatement too, we might not have an air cargo facility at the airport that's paying millions of dollars to the city in a lot of different ways, whether it's landing fees or gas tax or whatever. So there are bigger things out there that you might want to think about, and I'm trying to think about when we are saying no to things, we're not saying yes to other things. And so when a corporation like Amazon moves here, then there are other companies that go, oh, we need to put our distribution center or our manufacturing plant there as well. And so it's a bigger question of, do we really want to stop that? Because other companies may not make decisions to come here because we didn't get the Amazon in the first place. So what do I have, 6 or 7 more years doing this? I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. But my gut tells me We're not giving a bunch of money away. It's only been $6 million in 11 years of impact fees, and we've gotten 14 million back for it. It's not like some big hole we're digging. I think we stick with it for a while. Let's take another look at it. If you don't want to do 5 years, let's look at it in 3 years again and see if it's a mistake. We're open, but I don't think we want to turn the faucet off. And if we go to 150% or even 125, that faucet's going to go from 30 to 5 quick. And I don't think we want to do that.
Well, we create our own disincentive.
And we won't get that $500,000 that staff would like to get from the general fund, because then we won't have the projects that will be paying it. So I think we should stick with it for a while here and monitor it. If you want to come back and look at it earlier, than 5 years, fine.
Mr. Ruiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of points that I wanted to make. One is with only a couple of exceptions among the recommendations that we have presented this morning, they all came from desire of the commission on wages, on logistics and distribution, on innovation district. That means it's the commission's decision, obviously, you know that. To Steve's point that raising the wage eligibility will see this go from 30 to 5, remember that 20 of the 30 qualified as spec development without regard for jobs or wages at all. So the 11 that are on there now, 5 of which would qualify, you'd see that 11 go to 5, not 30 go to 5. And we haven't recommended removing inventory development as a criteria or eligibility for EDIFM. So 20 out of the 30 over the last 11 years would presumably still qualify. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Brian, from what I remember in the 2 strategic planning sessions we've had, when we talked about incentives, we also didn't have the LED perspective at the same time as we were discussing kind of as we would craft it. So I think I have always said that we need to hear from those who are on the ground in economic development before we set that threshold. Well, we can talk about it ourselves. Yes, that was commission discussion, and I know that desire was expressed, but it's always, for me, been with the caveat, but we need to hear from our economic development professionals in the city.
So when the staff sits down, and you're absolutely right, we didn't have like concrete, go make this happen, staff, but we try to figure out the wind and what has the commission said relative to these issues. And with EDIFM expiring or sunsetting on November the 1st, okay. And we've had multiple internal discussions. Jason and I met with Ashley 4 to 6 weeks ago. We met with the EDC earlier this week to try to pull all of this together, recognizing that we are not in 100% agreement on all of these topics, but that's okay. We can disagree.
Which goes back, commissioners, to the comments that I made when we were waiting for Ashley. That is exactly what this is. This is a workshop, and we have crafted a proposal based on some of the suggestions or directions made from the commission. But again, you do need the perspective of the EDC. You do need all pieces of the information so that you can give us some definitive direction with that knowledge, so that we can then bring something back to you when we have that from you.
To just one comment to Commissioner McLeod's comment, I would just say that, like, when we were watching the commission meeting earlier, and you guys were talking about the CRA project and waiving impact fees for water and sewer, and that would be about $500,000, whatever. It's very similar to that. This is almost what you just said is almost exactly what I just saw happen at the commission meeting. The CRA comes to you with a recommendation, say we have a 1 and we have a 2, we're going to negotiate with 1 and get back to you. But y'all started talking about it and started negotiating the deal. Well, we shouldn't give 70% or 90% because we only gave Broadway 50 or 60%, and we should do this and that. The developer's not here to even talk about it. You're already giving him the, hey, don't come back with a 70 or a 90, don't do this, don't do that. That's a dangerous way to make decisions. That land will sit over there for another 5 years and not get developed if you don't let the CRA do their job, come back to you with a recommendation, and have the developer telling you why it's not all those things you're bringing up are good ideas. That's not a good way to make a decision. And you're saying the exact same thing about this discussion. You do need to hear from us to know why it might be a bad idea to raise it to 150% and what the actual numbers are. And I'm transparent enough in doing this for 35 years to say, you know what, we can take a chance. I'm saying that, okay, if you think we should get rid of this, let's try it, but I'm concerned about it. I'm not sure we'll do as well. And when you look at us competing with Plant City and other places where they're right across the line and they can do this, and it's still going to impact our transportation system and stuff, I don't think that's a wise choice. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, Commissioner Madden.
So just a kind of a final thought for me too, the perspective too is even when we were having our strategic planning, and I'm grateful that you were listening and thinking about that, is you're there, I'm also thinking of it as the whole city, as a pie. And, you know, certainly when you have no growth, you incentivize and you hope for the best that you can get. When you start to see and experience growth, then you have smaller pieces and parcels left. And so then you're like, whew, what's our percentage now of this particular industry or growth? How much room do we have for growth? And what's our highest and best hopes for the future? Because when it's gone, it's gone. Mm-hmm. And that's why, in my opinion, I'm thrilled for the growth. I think this is a great, you know, accomplishment. But as the parcels get fewer, and we know that we need, you know, those jobs to match our college graduates' degrees, the college graduates that were in, you know, they love Lakeland and they want to live here, and we need jobs to match their degrees. You just don't want to like give up every last piece of land and incentivize doing it, and at the, you know, exclusion of having some special places for research and development, innovation, STEM jobs, you know, those things that are really going to continue to attract our college students and to get those higher skill, high wage jobs. And I think that we've all talked about that. It's really kind of, in our opinion, focused around Florida Poly because of what we've seen, what Dr. Avon has shown us, you know, what happens around small STEM schools and research parks. We don't own the land, but there is something powerful about knowing all the city leaders are constantly saying, we want something special, we will give a special incentive, come to, I mean, we're putting our profile on the dating website saying we want to have a date with someone who wants to come there, so that when a developer gets the property, they know this commission is ready, you know, and this city staff and is ready to make a deal, you know, especially with the first person that will, you know, mark the territory and get it springboarding. So I think that kind of helps clarify for staff too. You know, in my mind, I on one hand, you so appreciate what's happened and you can celebrate that, but as land is getting smaller and there's this one little opportunity left, your hopes are a little higher and your expectations are a little bigger, you know, for what happens there. And that's just kind of, does that make, I hope that it covers it.
I think it does.
Repeat that real quick.
This morning, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, several times during the discussion this morning, we've heard we don't want more warehouse and distribution. I don't think that's not accurate.
Right.
We don't perhaps want it badly enough to incentivize for it. That's really
And we don't want it in the
where we're at
innovation
with this.
district.
Right place, right time, right location. Yeah.
That's what, and I think I've said that in most of the things. I don't mind warehouse and distribution. I just want to save the innovation district. That is.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. There again, from my perspective, and of course, when we start talking about this again, I have no incentive, I have no desire to let this sunset. I think we need to, what, a sunset's November 1, is that what it is?
Yes, sir. And we've talked about a couple of different ways of addressing that. The good news is we do not have any projects waiting in the wings.
Okay.
Nothing pending right now. And we're the commission to choose over the next quarter to pass the successor program. You could make it effective, retroactive, like you did the fire fee resolution this morning, back to November 1st, as if it never expired. And anybody that comes in that interim, we can process and treat as though they will be eligible for some level of incentive, recognizing that anybody that came in right now wouldn't get through DRT and permitting in time, you know, before you passed the successor program.
So basically what I was going to say is, again, this is a tool in our toolbox that I think is necessary. And again, I want us to have that tool. And now whether it's a screwdriver or a saw, that may be a little bit different. But of course, I'd always thought, as we spoke, we want to incentivize the most around Polytechnical University, the innovation area. And I had always thought that we would kind of leave things the way they were at 115% in the warehousing, but they're going to maybe in the future might go to 120 or something like that. But or either if it's going to be a warehouse, it may go to 30% versus 50%. But I never thought anything about raising the 15 to 150 from my perspective. Now, I'm only one of a few, and it's been that's where I stand.
City Manager Shiraz.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. If it's okay, based on the way the discussion is going, I don't think we're probably going to have direction today. And so we have enough to go back and kind of take a look at. And I'll have conversations with the commission about, do we do another workshop so that we can better define what comes back to you? Or, do we just go based on the conversations that we heard and bring something back that you may want to adjust at that time? So we'll kind of figure that out as we move forward. But based on the way the conversation is going, I would like to call on Mike Brossart, the finance director, because I think he should now give a perspective about the impact to the general fund. So if Mike doesn't mind.
Sure. Would you mind putting your slide back up that showed? I'd like you to, yeah. Good morning. Afternoon.
15 minutes in.
Yes, it is, yeah. So,
We got here.
from a financial standpoint, whatever it's worth, finance completely agrees with and supports the EDFIM program. We love it. It's got such benefits, so we have no concerns about that. The only thing that I'd like you to at least consider as you move into your next steps in the process is this recommendation regarding the possibility of sending monies back to the impact fee funds from the general fund, okay? So I was thinking about this morning when you were talking about the TIF funds that are provided through the CRAs. When CRA does that, that's a benefit to the developers, and it's a cost to the CRAs that they don't get back. That's a cost, but it's a tremendous benefit to that area in what they're trying to accomplish in that area, okay? That same thing applies with the impact fee funds, both transportation districts, fire and police. Those are healthy funds, the same way the CRAs are healthy funds, okay? I'd just like you to think about the impact of taking, in this case, $588,000 and sending it to the impact fee funds, both transportation districts, if that's where it is, and then fire and police, which is the entire city, from the general fund. Remember, we were showing you how in the out years, even with 5% growth in the last year of the days cash, we were dropping it around 11 days, okay? Adding to that, you just need to think about whether or not that's something you really want to do, because again, the impact fee funds are healthy, okay? They could always take more, so could the general fund. General fund's your most important fund in the city, okay? That provides all the essential services. So I just caution you to at least consider that as you move forward about whether or not you want to write checks. And I'm thinking about the fact that right now we've seen a tremendous windfall over the last few years in the general fund, okay? Tremendous windfall. And so if you see these years where it may be we don't have that growth in property values and they level off a little bit, but we do see this type of expansion into the community, are you going to want to write a check for $600,000? Just something to think about. We'll make it work however you want to do it, but just think about that in the general fund. I think you had a question, sir.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. It sounds like, so when I look at this is staff recommendation. You have a little bit different perspective and a word of caution. And so maybe it seems to me there's a bit of a split among staff on whether you're recommending this or not. And so I would just ask, just maybe between now and our next meeting, that you clarify that as a team. Or is it here are two options, and here are the implications? Because I think that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sure.
Other questions?
Questions?
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you. So to me, in my opinion, if you have no growth, then you would have not been giving any impact fee mitigation to then have to recoup.
No, people could still move into your community, but it might be in, say, a leveling off of property values or a decrease in property values for whatever reason. But you still may get a business, for example, that had planned all along to buy the property and build, and because they believe that this is the place to be. So there could be a time where you would write a check back to the impact fee funds when you had a little bit of a residual challenge in the general fund. Regardless
You
of
don't
that.
think it would be commensurate with the growth? Like, because in my opinion, you had the growth, you gave an impact fee mitigation, and that increased your value, and then out of the value increase, it goes back into what you took out of the mitigate. So I'm thinking if you're not having growth and you're not giving away, then you're not paying into that pot, taking away from the other services. You know, if you're in a recession and there's no growth like their charts, then you've not been giving away you haven't been giving away the farm to have to replace.
But this is self-perpetuating, is that what you're saying?
I would say quite often you're right, but there's nothing, I would find it hard to believe that businesses did not move into our area or build during the recession. I'm sure there were some.
But if their increase they came in and it increased revenue that went back into whatever you gave them to incent them to come. Or maybe you didn't incent them because it was a recession.
But if you've lost enough in property values to where the general fund actually saw a decrease, like we've seen, right? And this isn't henny penny, this is just realistic, can happen, or they stay flat. But you've got all of your personnel costs, which is our largest cost in the general fund, going up. You just may in the future have to, if nothing else, if you decide to go with what Community Economic Development has recommended, leave yourself an out so that it's not a requirement every year. Maybe you get to decide at the end of every fiscal year, you get a report and you decide whether or not you're going to write that check from the general fund back into the impact fee funds. I'm just saying,
And I'm
think
curious,
about
does that make Chuck feel like he doesn't have the predictability? And you're saying that the impact fee fund is healthy, which is interesting to hear you say that, because it seems like Chuck doesn't have that same opinion.
No, I think I mean I agree with what Mike is saying. I mean I think the impact fee districts are healthy, but also during times like this, our transportation costs are also increasing. So we're collecting more in impact fees, but it costs more to build roads. I mean I think Greg James would agree that the Lakeland Park Drive extension, I know that one was about $2 million over the cost estimate. North Wabash, I think, was right around $1 million. And then in working with the developer for Lakeland Central Park, we had to get them to through a development agreement to prepay $1 million to fund 92 Wabash and County Line 92, to split those up to be able to get those projects to move forward. So I think that's the biggest concern is we can always use more because of the uncertainty and the increase in transportation costs. I think if there is the ability to audit at the end of the fiscal year, we would then be able to kind of go back and take a look at, certainly the budget situation as it exists at that time, look at the impact fee collections and maybe make a call at that point in time, and see what traffic is doing. Because that's for me, I want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we're not able to address or react to traffic challenges that come up during a certain period of time as well. So it's, the budgetary impacts, looking to see what we can get in terms of development, but also making sure that the infrastructure can still support that development.
Well, and I think that is my point, like knowing that we had $700,000 that we didn't anticipate because our property values were higher this year, and I want to have funds for a Wabash extension that is somewhere out into the future with no money. I'm like, why can't we have that where's the line item that goes, like a regular person in their budget goes, oh, I've got extra, I'm going to put this in this line item to make sure we get that that Wabash extension. I don't see us doing that often with regard to our transportation issues. So to me, having the predictability and making ourselves do that in our budget to make sure that we're mitigating the traffic as we grow makes me feel better, because I feel like we have not been doing that because there's no predictable. We want to give incentives to developers. We don't want them to have the burden of all the costs. But then somehow we have to have some mechanism of making sure we get that Wabash extension, so we don't have, so that in my mind, I was like, oh, wow, I saw a path forward in having some predictable revenue stream into mitigating some of the things that we've kind of started to see. When you have growth, your biggest constraint is traffic.
Commissioner Music, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, the predictability is a double-edged sword, right? If we try to predict out too far, you're not doing anything. But if we review yearly though, and we audit it yearly and try to make decisions off of that, that's gotta be incredibly difficult from a developmental side, because these projects are 18 months to 3 years. So for somebody to wonder in the middle of a project, am I gonna get audited out of it? I don't know that I like that.
If I could, back to your point, Commissioner Madden, we had enough windfalls this year in the impact fee funds that right now, over the 10-year impact fee fund file that we maintain, it's not in the budget, it translates into the transportation fund. There's $3 million that we've been able to identify in the last few weeks that we've put as a line item we got to get with Sean to make sure that's what he wants to codify. There's $3 million set aside for a Wabash Avenue reserve based on what you were talking about during the budget cycles. But we've had those windfalls within the last year or so in the transportation fund, so we've been able to identify that already. So just as a comfort to you, we've already started identifying. Like I said, right now it's at least $3 million. Exactly $3 million we have set aside.
And that's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, and that's because, and that's simply because we're just finishing the end of the fiscal year. We're just getting to the point where we're getting the financials together. It's something I was working on, and I was going to get with Sean and Emily and Nicole and make sure they're cool with it. But there's no reason not to, based on what you're saying. We can change it however you want, but it would go into next year's fiscal budget in the transportation fund as a reserve. It would just show as a reserve set aside, and then as impact fees come in that you decide you want to add to that, you can. That's your
I would caution you, Mr. Brozart, in saying windfall when we talk about public dollars. That just stresses me out a little bit. Just because those are public dollars that are coming in the form of taxes. So I think it's semantics, but it says that we just have extra money laying around, and we were just surprised by it, which, we were with property increases of property appraising, but I just think that might not be a term that we want to use financially, like when we talk about city money. But anyway, yes, Mr. Scruggs.
I'd like to make a final comment, and actually two. One is, when we call this an incentive, it's really, if we had lower impact fees, we wouldn't have to do this. So just know, people, that's a hot button word, incentives, but really, if we just had impact fees that were more competitive with Plant City's about $500 a thousand square feet, or over $1,000 a square feet for the same building. So, and we can talk about Tampa and Orlando and everybody else. We like to compare ourselves. We want to be kind of in the middle. We don't want to be a lot more expensive. We don't want to be a lot less expensive. So when you start evaluating these things, it's really best to just look at your competition, not try to pull it out of a hat somewhere. So if we got rid of this program, the first thing that I would do, we need a workshop on lowering impact fees to be competitive. It's semantics. So I just want to say that. Remember, the impact fees are so high for apartments that we haven't built any until this year for 7 years. So we can put high impact fees up and never collect them because we're not going to get any growth. Last thing I want to say is I want to thank Sean and Brian and Chuck, even though he and I disagree, and the whole team. There is much more collaborative effort here going on between the EDC and the city. over the last 9 months, and especially the last 3 or 4 months. So we really appreciate meeting with your team here on Tuesday and going over this. Even, like Brian said, even if we don't agree, it's okay. We're on the same team. We all want what's good for Lakeland, and I really appreciate the approach of management and the management team. And we feel like we're being heard, and we feel like we're on the same team. And whatever happens, we're going to lock arms and we're going to go try to recruit those companies that will pay those fees, that will build our roads, because we're all in this together. I want to say that.
And keep you all from getting the calls about the traffic and that's the other thing, is making sure that once everybody is here and operating, that we keep the calls to the commission and to the city manager's office at a minimum. So
That would be lovely. Well, thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything, City Manager Strauss.
I would just want to, maybe talk about the as far as the impact fees. They're just not artificially set, as the commission is aware. We have had the impact fee, studies and recommendations that are made, and then the commission has made decisions, on what those fees should be based upon that. And so I don't want anyone in the public who's listening to maybe think that those are just kind of arbitrary numbers. And then does the commission at this point, do you feel we should have a follow-up workshop? Or would you like for us to try to, make some adjustments based on kind of some of the things we heard? Or, is that something you'd rather we can discuss individually and decide where we go from here?
I would recommend, and I'll defer to my fellow commissioners, but I'd recommend processing and massaging all the information that you all got today and maybe coming back with even a presentation and an agenda study or something that's not so much a workshop, but that's just my opinion.
I agree. I would like to see something again before we.
Yeah. Everybody good with that?
Okay. All right.
And just for point of reference, you saw that the mayor had to go. We're going to move our next item to Monday morning at 8 a.m. To do the review of the city attorney and city manager. And we'll do it in the conference room, commission conference room, and then move into here for a commission meeting, since we've been here a while. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
All right. I don't need a motion. It's a workshop, right? For adjournment.
No.
So we can adjourn. Thank y'all.
thank you.
Uh,